Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about shape layers. I apologize for my absence over the last couple of days. Had a lot of jobs, finishing, completing artworks, loops, that kind of thing, but we're all done now, or well, I've almost all done, but that's not important right now. What's important is I'm going to show you about shape layers and paths, which might not seem like the most interesting thing in the world from the sounds of it, but I'm going to show you that these things are actually some of the most powerful features in Photoshop. So the shape layers lie here in the, I guess it's a rectangle. You might have a rounded, an ellipse, a polygon, a line, or a custom shape. The idea behind these is once you've made them, they're all shape layers, and you can apply a stroke and a fill. If you've used Illustrator before, this will all be like very familiar to you. I'm going to start with a rectangle, which can also be a square. So what happens is, if you look up here, I have shape selected, which is important. Path 4 pixels. I'm going to select shape. The fill is the color that will be in the middle of your shape. So I'm going to select something that's going to contrast quite nicely with this gray here. So I'm going to select pink. And on stroke, I'm going to select, let's say blue, because that will probably be quite easy to see. I'm going to make the stroke size maybe 3 pixels, and we're going to leave this kind of straight line. So we should have a filled shape with a blue stroke of 3 pixels. So let's see what happens. So we draw it out, you'll get this preview, which is like this grey box, and then you let go and it will fill itself in. And you can see up here on the right we have this little, I guess, square with like little corners on it, which means this is a shape layer. Now, as we can see, like the blue stroke isn't very visible because it's not that big. If I have V selected, I can move this thing around, as you might expect. If we select the arrow tool here, it will get us our menu as long as we have the layer selected, which means we can actually go back and change things interactively, which is really useful. So even after you've drawn a shape, as long as it stays a shape, you can go back and like change the width. If we're not too like hot on the color, we might like be like, oh, change that. So there's different kinds. You have a gradient, we can fill it with a gradient, and this menu should be familiar based on the one I showed you the other day. Again, here you can make this thing radial and all the rest of it, diamond, etc, etc. I'm going to leave this linear. This is the angle at which the gradient will be applied, and you know, all the usual stuff, the align with layer. This reverses your gradient. So pretty simple stuff. So if we come back, we can change it back to a fill by selecting that. If we come here, we can add like a pattern. At the moment I've got like not many there. You can change the scale of the pattern, make it bigger or smaller. So make it horrific or make it tiny. And you can load more by just going to here, and then you should have load patterns, and then if you've got any downloaded, it will load them into this panel and save them, which is really useful. Or you can just select a color, which will take you back to your fill menu. So all pretty simple, really. The thing that's changed in Photoshop more recently is that you can actually do all this stuff with a stroke now, which is actually super useful. So you know, you can apply a pattern to the stroke, you can apply a gradient to the stroke. So let's apply this kind of, let's apply maybe the same one but like inverted or something. So obviously right now they match up perfectly, but if we invert it, we get like quite a nice effect here. And yeah, I mean, that's it. That's the long and short of, you know, it's not particularly complicated. So if I select this, press A to select my direct selection tool. If you hold this down and select the white selection tool, you can select points and like move these points around, which is also really useful. Again, after you've made the shape, gives you the option to basically change and move it around, which is actually super useful. And here you can change the actual stroke. So because our stroke is so massive right now, I'm going to bring this down to like 13 maybe, just to make it kind of a bit clearer what's going on, and maybe not have it the same color anymore. Maybe make it let's make it red. Yeah, or maybe now red will do. Okay, so here you have basically the stroke, and you can align it to the center, so you can align it to the path or the outside. So the outside will go to the you know, the outside of your little box here. If you come back in, you can align it to like dead on the middle, and then what it was by default, which is in the middle. Again, whatever you want. Caps is like how the stroke will kind of round itself off. And if you go to more options here, you can actually choose the if you want alternate, so you want like a dash of 4, a gap of 2, and then maybe like a 10, and then maybe a 6, just to make like an irregular pattern. So now we have our 4, then a gap of 2 pixels, and then, you know, a dash of 10 pixels, then a gap of 6, and then it starts again. And so you can customize your path this way, which you know, is great. You have lots of presets here, so like how you might want them to look, all that good stuff. And here, this is how like it's applied around the corners. So yeah, you could, again, because I've got a dash of 0 here, and because it's rounded, we're making little dots, so that's quite a cool tip to know if you ever want something to have like a dotted stroke or whatever. It's actually super useful. So that's the basics of the shape layer. If we come back to our tool, you'll notice here that we can combine shapes, subtract, intersect, and what this means is if I go to combine shapes and make another one and draw this over here, you'll see it's not made a new layer, but instead now we have 2 shapes that are intersecting, and their total surface area is what's being affected by the stroke here. I'm going to change the stroke to something more regular, just so you get a better idea. So this is like really powerful because you can combine shapes, and it's probably the better way of getting more complex shapes. So you'd build like a basic shape and then build extra ones kind of shooting out and stuff, and you know, you can do it in the same way you can do that. You can also subtract, so you know, I might make a circle and subtract that from here. Have I got subtract open? No, there we go, subtract front shape. So there we go, remove that, and yeah, now we've got a hole in there. So you know, if you've ever used Illustrator, these tools will be like really familiar to you, but if for people that don't really like Illustrator, don't like going into there, it's kind of cool that they've built this functionality into Photoshop now. And Illustrator is still massively useful for many things, but this has kind of like made the crossover between the two a little less necessary, which, you know, is always a good thing. And here you have like, you know, how you want to align everything, and then if you have more than one shape, you can bring them forward, like say they're overlapping and stuff, and based on the cutout modes you want here, you can merge, which will like clean up your shape and kind of get rid of like all the extraneous pieces that you don't want, I guess. And then yeah, you got your little if you come into the pen tool and you go to convert point, you can convert like a hard corner to soft corner and vice versa, which is super useful to know in case you did not know that. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it for shapes. Really useful. And then again, you know, like I showed you yesterday with layer styles, all this kind of good stuff is available. So the inner glow, you know, you can add an extra stroke to the stroke, which might be blowing your mind right about now, but yeah, it's a stroke upon a stroke. And I can put this on the outside or the inside, whichever way, and then make this smaller. And then there you go, you got like a stroke within a stroke. And then obviously you can duplicate and then make another stroke. And it gets really crazy. And we're going to put this outside. Anyway, you get the idea. You can stack all that kind of stuff and the layer styles and the shapes, and make something really fun. Now, the other thing I'm going to show you is paths. And the path, so obviously by default when you get the pen tool, the pen tool, by the way, I'm not sure if I explained it, but I kind of it's basically for drawing freeform shapes. As you can see, I've got a shape here selected, so what I'm actually doing is creating a shape with, you know, all the parameters that I just explained to you. So the kind of the changeable stroke, and you know, the fill and all that stuff. You can knock it out by clicking the line in case you don't want to fill. But the pen tool and this work in a similar way in that you can make shapes, paths, or pixels. Pixels I would rarely do because, you know, like you're kind of limited. Path is kind of useful. So a path can be used for many things, but what I'm going to do is change this to path, and I'm going to create a path. So what you've just seen me make is a path, but what happens when you make a shape is that it then fills it in and applies a stroke, but essentially what you're making is a path, I believe. But what happens with the path tool is if you switch to your pen tool and right click, you get these options. You can make masks, which I've shown you before. You can delete the path, which is you can define a custom shape. Now this is one thing before I get into paths that I didn't show you, which might be useful to know. So yes, you can make rectangles, you can make circles, shape. So yes, you can make circles, but you can also make polygons. And if I press up and down on my, no, it's not up and down, I keep thinking I'm an illustrator. You can change the number of sides here, so like 3, and now you got a triangle, etc. But the most interesting one here might be the custom shape tool. So what this does is it adds a little menu here, and there's lots of like really useful shapes which are pre-built into Illustrator, like the copyright one here. And the good thing about this is there's loads of them hidden, like you got the film ones. Let's just hit all, and so this will bring up like all the shapes inside that are built into Photoshop. So you get these like cool little patterns that you can mess around with. So it's kind of worth knowing. So back to paths real quick. I'm going to select path. I'm going to make a new layer here, and I'm going to make a path, and I'm just going to close it. I'm just selecting the pen tool again, just to be clear on that. And you can make a selection, so I can change this, make a selection, so hit OK, and so there I made a selection. You can press Control Alt Enter to do this as well. So as you can see right now, it's kind of like making an inverse selection, but as you know, it can do Control Shift I to invert that, and then you can fill the selection with a color or a gradient. If we select a gradient here, all that stuff that we've done with selections before. So let's come back, go back to our path, press P. We can make a mask. So if we had like this layer here, we can make a mask out of it. Boom. Now as you can see, the vector mask looks a bit different, but essentially works in the same way. Just means you got your pen points kind of still here. It's kind of like a shape mask, I guess. What else we got? And we have a shape, last but not least. And so if I make this, as you can see, we've created a shape. So here we've kind of inverted it, but you can do it the other way around as well. But a useful thing to know is if I bring my brush menu into here, and I know I'm kind of running on with this, but I wanted to cover these two in the same lesson, so we didn't really have to go back and do an extra lesson, which might not be that exciting if I did it by itself. So here I have a brush, and I will explain brushes I think in the next lesson. So if I just draw on my canvas here, this is what my brush is doing right now, and depending on what you pick on your brush, you might be doing different things, but I'm going to pick this brush that I just had. So that's kind of cool. And what you can do is press P and right click. You need to be like somewhere near your path, and you can go to stroke path, and it's going to ask you what you want to use, and I'm going to say my brush because that's what I got selected. Simulate pressure, I'm going to hit OK, and at the moment for some reason I've changed back to black, so I'm going to do that again. So we're going to stroke path, hit OK, and what it's done is it's actually drawn along the path, and that is really cool. Obviously I baked it into this layer by accident, so what I'm going to do is come out, select a new layer, again press P, go to stroke path. If I don't simulate pressure, you'll just get an even stroke, at which point you might as well be making a shape. But if you stroke the path with simulate pressure, then you get this kind of cool like one which starts and then gets bigger and then gets back to a bit, and then you can right click and then delete the path. And the power of this is now you can like add an inner glow to it. Let's make this something that might be visible, like an overlay maybe. Put that up. Okay, maybe like add. Where's that? Not quite sure why this isn't showing up, but it's just because I got it massive. There we go. I apologize. So yeah, you can add all your effects to it, but the way I would use this in a Photoshop scenario, and the reason it made that stroke is because that is what it looks like here. So we've got a stroke going from fat to thin. If I would make a pen and like draw a path and change my brush to like this speckled one and press P, right click and go to stroke path and hit OK, we're gonna like apply, again it's gonna go like small to big, but we're gonna apply this splatter brush. So you can see why this would be useful in Photoshop. So what this is usually used for is making light streaks. So it's gonna take whatever your brush is. So if your brush is massive, I'm going to make my brush really small, and don't worry, like I'll explain this another day. So something like this, I'm going to make this like, you know, maybe like off yellow, and I'm going to draw like a path like this, maybe just like that, and then I'm going to hit P and then right click, stroke path, simulate pressure, okay, delete. And what this is really cool for is making these kind of streaks. And again, I need to make a new layer. I'm going to, okay, so I apologize to put that. So okay, so now if I delete the path, I have this stroke on a layer by itself, and then you can add like outer glows and things like this, and really powerful. And I use this technique a lot. It's kind of one of the first ones I learned from like the advanced Photoshop magazines back in the day. And so you can make these, okay, I've gone like a little OTT there, but you can make these kind of like cool glowy light streak things that seem to be really popular even nowadays on like Photoshop work. So yeah, there you go, that's one of the more useful tips, and then obviously adjust to taste. So yeah, that covers it for shapes and paths. I hope you learned something, and please leave a comment if you have any questions. Like, comment and subscribe, etc, etc. I will see you on the next one. Goodbye.